This is iCastNews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City, and this is Cafe Forum International. Joining me today is Stuart Stugel. Stewie, from the Washington Times man at the United Nations. When was the last time you heard a country saying they were going to destroy the United States with nuclear weapons soon?
The North Koreans about 10 years ago.
Oh, so this is like a broken record.
We've heard it before.
What do you think's going on? We've got a new young guy who's untested, unknown, and we've got all this saber rattling. You think it's just noise?
Well, I think when Kim Jong-un became the newest supreme leader, I think there were two factions behind the throne, so to speak. There was the political faction, and then there was the military faction. It would appear that the military faction seems to have won, and what you are seeing now is the military faction signaling to those folks outside of North Korea that the military cabal or the military group is now running the show rather than the civilian group.
And so if the military is running the show, they want to pour even more resources into the military, so they have even fewer resources. Is this a signal, let's starve the North Korean people more?
No, but I think what it says is that if Washington wants to see any progress in relations with North Korea, they're going to have to deal with the military rather than the civilian factions. And
so prudent diplomacy would dictate what is the next step? Sending B-2 bombers over the country, Aegis cruisers off the shore?
Not necessarily. I think at this particular point, they've probably reached a boiling point. And I think the telltale sign that they've reached the boiling point was the fact they transferred command over these missiles to local military commanders in the region rather than from Pyongyang. That lends a new wild card into the situation. However, anybody who knows North Korea knows that there's no field general that's going to launch an attack on his own. It's simply not going to happen.
Right.
It all comes from Central Command in Pyongyang, but symbolically, the fact that they've transferred the power to commanders in the field again shows that the military is in command rather than the politicians. And as such, Washington's going to have to gear its future relations more toward the military faction rather than the political faction.
Are there back channels between the Pentagon and the North Korean military?
Well, sure. There are really, from what I understand, two back channels. There is the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, and there's also the North Korean mission to the UN here in New York. The New York channel has often been used for back channel negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang.
And if we want to make sense out of the coverage of North Korea these days, we know that the Associated Press has a bureau there, although who knows if they have any access to the military. What are you reading? What would you urge people to keep their eye on so that they're a little bit more informed than the hysteria that we see on some of the major networks?
Well, I think North Korea within the next week or two is going to launch a ballistic missile. Where it's pointed to and the range of that missile is going to be a telltale sign. I think that the Americans are dead set on shooting that missile down if it approaches Guam. The Japanese, conversely, want to shoot down the missile if it approaches Japan. I think that'll be the zenith as to where we're going on this. And I think that the missile may be intercepted or may not be intercepted. If it's not intercepted and the North Koreans keep to the public story that it was nothing more than a test of a missile, I think that'll cool it off, especially if it's successful and the Americans could not intercept it. If they do intercept it, I think there'll be some rhetoric from North Korea and they'll let this current confrontation die a slow death. What they don't want is a major confrontation between the North and South Korea at this particular point.
And what are the spin-off consequences for Japan? Japan's been pushing and prodding on islands in the South China Sea. They've been trying to talk about rearming, becoming less of a post-World War II non-military power. Is this going to increase the faction inside Japan that says we need to rearm, we have to have more military?
I don't think it'll increase it. I think it will give them, the existing faction that wants to rearm, more fuel to the fire. And I think the Japanese will rearm. It's not a question of rearming, it's a question of the extent of the rearming, because the Japanese really don't need American assistance or American funds to rearm. I think they will rearm, but I think they'll do so cautiously and slowly.
And of course, they're still in the backwash of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. So any talk in Japan of nuclear things is not going anywhere real fast.
Right, but remember one other thing, and that is right now the South Korean economy is doing very well. We just saw Samsung have a major news conference regarding cell phones more than 2 weeks ago.
I love my Samsung devices. Those Koreans are very smart folks.
Conversely, a lot of those companies are headquartered in Seoul. And the last thing they want is to see their headquarters be the target of, let's say, 200 or 300 mortar shells from North Korea. So, in my view, the industrial giants of South Korea are also going to put pressure on the South Korean government not to get involved in a military conflict at this time, because any kind of a military conflict could send the South Korean economy into a tailspin.
It could be as bad as Japan.
It could be a lot worse.
Yeah, it could be a lot worse. Stuart, thank you very much for coming in and joining us. Regards to your friends at the Washington Times.
Thank you.
For iCastNews.com, live and direct from the United Nations, for Cafe Forum International, I'm Jonathan Sanders.